Bruce Campbell joins me now for the Stonecastle Asset Management Cannabis Week update. Bruce, welcome back. Bruce, so here we are at the end of the first week of Cannabis 2.0. What are you hearing about sales in the markets across Canada?
Well, specifically in Ontario, they've been extremely strong from what we've heard. And the fact that the edibles sold out the very first day. So apparently gummies were gone. Most of them were gone within the first hour, but by 3 o'clock, pretty much all of them were gone for sure. Chocolates were the same thing. The one interesting tidbit that we heard was there was a lot of vape product, and we heard quite a few conversations around the price of those vape products being so expensive in relative terms to say what you would get those for in the black market or in the US, which probably, I guess, isn't that surprising given, that was the same criticism of the straight cannabis to begin with as well.
Interesting. So is the expectation that there is going to be a supply deficit for the time being, similar to that which occurred when legal cannabis first occurred recreationally?
Yeah, that's what I think, and it's going to take a little bit longer because obviously they have to grow the product and then they have to manufacture the product. So there should be enough of the supply from the flower, but then obviously they're going to have to manufacture the product. So at the same time you're ramping up, you're increasing stores. So I suspect you're going to probably see much of the same type of issues that you saw with the dried flower, and even for that matter, when you look at something like Illinois, where they're experiencing the same type of things after they've gone legal from a recreational standpoint as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. So gummies and chocolates are big sellers, are they?
They seem to be. Yeah, everybody likes their sweets, I guess.
Interesting.
Which is a little bit surprising after right after the New Year, right? You'd sort of think it would be something other than that, given probably most people have New Year's resolution not to eat so much.
Right. Isn't January when most people head for the gym and stay away from intoxicants?
That's right.
Although I know in my case that certainly didn't happen this year. Okay, so also we had the announcement that Canopy Growth has delayed its launch of its beverage line. What's behind that whole story?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't go into a lot of detail, but just from some of the speculation that we've heard, it really revolves around the onset and the offset. They did a tour of one of their facilities, I believe it was just before Christmas, and they actually sampled product. It didn't have any cannabis in it, and so it seemed like they had formulations down, and now they've announced this delay. So the speculation is it's around the onset and offset of the cannabis in the product. And I mean, this has been something that's been pretty challenging in the past. As we've talked about before, it can have so much dependence on, sort of what your chemistry is for the day, what you have in your stomach, things like that, that it's hard to predict. That being said, we are a little bit surprised. Canopy's got a few different partners that they work with that have water soluble technology, or at least claim to have water soluble technology that affects or certainly can have an impact on the onset and the offset. Because at the end of the day, they want this to be similar to alcohol as far as the time it takes for you to ingest it and feel something, and then also the time it takes to sort of wear out of your system, because that's what people are used to. They've been doing that for over 100 years now, and that's really the experience that they want. So we're a little bit surprised that the Canopy ended up here, and it probably comes, what would be a worse time for them, but maybe it helps their competitors as well.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. So the World Health Organization announced that it's moving towards descheduling cannabis globally as a class 1 substance. So you think that's going to be a sort of precursor to federal deprohibition for the United States?
Well, certainly it could be. I mean, if you go back in history when Canada was, a year ago or a little over a year ago, when we were going through that process and going to be rec, that was one of the criticisms, is that we were actually going against some of the law that's out there, and that this would be a major issue. Well, if you have the World Health Organization starting to deschedule it, then maybe that leads to sort of United Nations freeing up their classification of it, and then presumably that would allow someone like the U.S. and maybe some other countries to make it legal, or at least to adopt it a little bit quicker down that legal pathway.
So do you think that that's going to encourage other countries to accelerate their embrace of medical cannabis?
Well, I think it will. We've already seen quite an acceleration worldwide, right? If you go back sort of when Canada first rolled out our program almost 20 years ago now, compared to, what we're seeing in the last sort of 2 years, there's been this huge acceleration. So, the curve's gone really steep. It's that hockey stick, really, where there was only a few countries that had come out with any type of medical programs, and then the last couple of years you've seen just sort of country after country sort of pile on and look at that. Now if we were to see World Health Organization come out and say that they were descheduling it, and if it was no longer criminally classified under the UN accord, then you might also see more acceleration as well.
Well, that's interesting. Some of the market technicals. Let's talk about HMMJ and weed. What's the what are the charts telling you about the near-term future of the cannabis market there, Bruce?
Yeah, we track this quite closely at Stonecastle, and what we've noticed that over, say, the last probably 8 weeks, we saw a declining momentum in a lot of the indicators that we saw, like downside momentum. And typically when we've seen this in the past, it's scheduling or showing us that there's going to be some type of change. And of course, we hadn't experienced that. We went through tax loss selling the first week of the year, and we still weren't seeing that. There was a lot of people sort of scratching their heads trying to figure out what that meant. And then this week, you saw good numbers from Organogram, which really sort of started to accelerate things. So if you look at the charts of say Canopy would be sort of the leader. If you look at the a MACD momentum indicator on a weekly basis, it's really the amount of negative momentum has been waning, and then back in December it actually crossed positive, and now you're seeing that same move from the HMMJ, which is obviously more broad-based. And at the same time, you're seeing something like Canopy. It's recapturing a lot of its moving averages that it's been lost in the past. So, if you're a pure technician, lots of people sort of from a very simplistic state look at the 50 and 200-day moving averages. Well, they're now they've recaptured those 50 days, and they're moving in on the 200-day, and they have positive momentum. So it looks like that tide that's been, sort of 8.5 months in the decline is now starting to shift, and we could see several months here of positive, which is typically what happens. Is the sector, we talk about there being 7 previous downtrends, and now we're starting the 8th uptrend. So it's always we don't know where it's going to go from an upside perspective, but what we know is that the tide has really changed here.
Yeah, well, from our perspective, we've noticed that the large cap cannabis index, which is all the companies over $1 billion in Canada, or over 500 million now. We actually backed it up to, because we were going to lose too much of the index. They've all, trended completely reversed, and the whole week has been green. And then also in the CSE, which is the proxy for the US MSOs, those two are both doing very well. But all the ones in our venture cannabis index, which is the $100 to $500 million companies operating in Canada, and then those are the companies that are just on the venture index, and all the companies in our small cap index, which is the 100 to $500 million companies. Those ones are both still looking a little bit anemic, and so it seems like it's really become, on the one hand, it's the titans who are battling it out and are leading the recovery, and on the other hand, there's a real sort of push and pull between the US MSOs and the large cap Canadian ones. So who do you think's going to win that battle in 2020?
Yeah, so looking at this year, I think that there could be multiple opportunities in both of those areas. So if you look at the Canadian side, obviously to start with, we're seeing a lot of these Canadian 2.0 products being sold out. So there's going to be a ramp up there. There's also a ramp up in retail, and so there's going to be money that's driven to the big Canadian stocks. There's also an opportunity in the U.S. And then maybe that happens later on in the year. As we see some of the challenges in the U.S. start to get ironed out, as an example, Illinois, they're running out of products as well. And sort of as that's ramped up, or we get closer to something happening in New York or New Jersey. So there could be multiple opportunities in multiple areas, both Canada and the U.S. over different timeframes. And then even in Canada, as you mentioned, the large caps have been the ones that have really been driving, but that's pretty normal when you've come out of a bottom. You tend to see the biggest stuff move first, and then people start to go down cap looking for opportunities, and as they see those, they invest in other areas. So that's where you could start to see that 100 to 500 start to move once people are comfortable that we started a new uptrend, and now let's look for the companies that haven't moved or have the maybe higher torque to their business.
Right. All right, Bruce. Well, that's very insightful contribution as usual. We're going to leave it there for now, and I'm going to come back to you next week. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Take care. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye for now.